I've watched millions of educated Americans work their entire lives and never accumulate real wealth. I've seen folks with multiple degrees, impressive resumes, and six-figure salaries retire broke. And here's what really gets me. Most of them made the exact same mistakes over and over again, thinking they were doing everything right. Let me tell you something that's going to make you uncomfortable. Education doesn't guarantee wealth. I know that sounds crazy coming from someone who reads 8 hours a day, but it's the truth. The brutal truth. In 2026, the average Social Security check is $271 a month. That's what most educated Americans are living on after 40 years of work. And they're shocked, absolutely shocked. Because somewhere along the way, they confuse being smart with being financially smart. Those are two completely different things. I'm going to share 10 brutal truths with you today. Not theories, not motivational fluff. Real reasons why educated people stay poor and what you can actually do about it. Before we dive in, I want you to do something for me. Calculate your actual net worth right now. Not your salary, not what you think you're worth, your real net worth. Assets minus liabilities. Write it down. We're going to come back to that number. Brutal truth number one. You confuse your paycheck with wealth. Here's the first mistake I see educated folks make. And it's the big one. They get a good job, maybe making $80,000, $90,000, even $150,000 a year. And they think they've made it. They haven't. They've just gotten a paycheck. There's a massive difference between earning money and building wealth. And most people never figure that out. The median household income in America right now sits at $83,730 and $30. That sounds pretty good until you realize that number has barely moved since 2019 when you adjust for inflation. You're working harder, getting more degrees, climbing the corporate ladder, and your purchasing power is standing still. Meanwhile, somebody who understands asset allocation has been building real wealth the entire time. Let me tell you what I did differently. When I was making $40,000 a year at Berkshire, I was saving 75% of it. Not because I was cheap, because I understood something fundamental. Your savings rate determines your financial future more than your salary ever will. I see doctors making $300,000 a year with zero net worth. I see engineers making $200,000 with massive debt. They've got the income, but they're spending every single penny on depreciating assets, high-cost mortgages, and keeping up with colleagues who are also broke. The average 401k contribution limit for 2026 just increased to $24,500. That's a good number. But here's what nobody tells you. If you're making $100,000 and contributing the maximum, you're still only saving about 25% of your gross income before taxes. Most people aren't even close to that. They're contributing 3%, 5%, maybe getting the employer match and thinking they're doing great. They're not. They're falling behind. I learned this when I bought my first stock at age 11. I didn't buy it because I had a lot of money. I bought it because I understood that owning assets was different than spending money. That 3 shares of City Service Preferred taught me more about wealth than most people learn in a lifetime. Education gives you earning power, but it's what you do with those earnings that determines whether you build wealth or stay broke. Now, I want you to take a second and really let that sink in, because the next thing I'm going to share is where most folks lose their entire legacy. Brutal truth number 2, your student loans are destroying your future. Let's talk about something nobody wants to admit. Student loan debt is crippling an entire generation of educated Americans, and I mean crippling. The average student loan debt in America right now is $39,375 per borrower. Total student loan debt has hit $181 trillion. That's trillion with a T. And here's the brutal part. The people carrying this debt are the exact same people who were supposed to be building wealth. I never borrowed money for education, not because college was cheap in the 1940s. It wasn't, but because I understood something fundamental about debt. Every dollar you owe is a dollar you can invest. Every month you're making a loan payment is a month you're not building compound interest in your favor. I see folks graduating with master's degrees carrying $69,000 in debt. Law school graduates with $140,000. Medical school graduates with $200,000, and they spend the next 20, 30 years paying it off while the opportunity to build real wealth passes them by. Here's what really gets me. These aren't stupid people. They're educated. They ran the numbers. They believe the promise that the degree would pay for itself. Sometimes it does. Often it doesn't. I've watched brilliant people make one bad financial decision at age 22 and spend the rest of their lives recovering from it. That's not education. That's financial illiteracy dressed up in a cap and gown. The median amount of student debt in 2024, according to the Federal Reserve, was between $20,000 and $24,999. That might not sound catastrophic until you realize what that money could have done invested in the market. $20,000 invested at age 22, earning a 10% average return, turns into $314,000 by age 65. But instead, it went to interest payments on debt for an education that maybe added $50,000 to lifetime earnings. Now, here's what you need to understand about portfolio diversification. It only works if you actually have a portfolio to diversify. If all your money is going to debt service, you're not building anything. You're treading water, and the longer you tread water, the further behind you fall. I'm not saying don't get educated. I'm saying think like an investor about the cost. Run the numbers on return on investment, because a degree that costs $100,000 and increases your earning power by $30,000 a year needs to be evaluated the same way I'd evaluate buying a business. Would I pay $100,000 for something that generates $30,000 annually? Maybe. Depends on the terms, depends on the alternatives. The people who win in America aren't always the most educated. They're the people who made smart financial decisions early and let compound interest do the heavy lifting. Education is an investment. Treat it like one, because if you don't, you'll spend your entire life paying for a mistake you made when you were barely old enough to vote. Brutal truth number 3. You're paying 40% of your income in hidden taxes. Let me tell you about something that makes my blood boil. Tax inefficiency. Most educated Americans are getting destroyed by taxes, and they don't even know it. They think taxes are just that thing that happens in April. They're not. Taxes are happening every single day in ways you're not even aware of, and it's costing you a fortune. Here's the reality. If you're a high-earning professional making between $100,000 and $200,000, you're in the worst possible tax situation. You make too much to get breaks, but not enough to have a sophisticated tax strategy. You're paying federal income tax at 22 or 24%. You're paying Social Security tax, Medicare tax, state income tax, property tax, sales tax. By the time you add it all up, you're handing 40% of everything you earn to various levels of government. 40%. Now, I pay taxes. I believe in paying taxes, but I pay a much lower effective rate than most educated professionals, and it's completely legal. Why? Because I understand tax efficiency. I understand the difference between ordinary income and capital gains. I understand how to structure compensation. I understand estate planning and when to realize gains and losses. Most people don't. They just take their paycheck, pay the taxes withheld, and never question if there's a better way. Let me give you a concrete example. The 401k contribution limit for 2026 is $4,500. If you're in the 24% federal tax bracket and you max out your 401k, you just saved almost $6,000 in federal taxes alone. That's real money. But here's what kills me. Only about 6% of workers are maxing out their contributions. Most people are leaving thousands of dollars on the table because they don't understand the tax code. And it gets worse. Starting in 2026, if you earn more than $150,000 in 2025 and you're over 50, your catch-up contributions must now be Roth contributions. That's after tax money. The rules are changing. And most people won't find out until they talk to their accountant in April and realize they messed up. That's not financial planning. That's financial negligence. I see doctors, lawyers, engineers making big money, and they're not talking to a fiduciary about tax strategy. They're not maximizing their qualified retirement plans. They're not thinking about Roth conversions or tax loss harvesting or any of the legal strategies that could save them tens of thousands of dollars every single year. And over a 40-year career, that adds up to millions. Literal millions left on the table because they didn't understand tax efficiency. The wealthy don't pay less in taxes because we cheat. We pay less because we understand the rules. The tax code is written to incentivize certain behaviors: retirement savings, business ownership, real estate investment, long-term capital gains. If you're not taking advantage of those incentives, you're volunteering to pay more than you should. That's not noble. That's just expensive. Brutal truth number 4. You bought lifestyle instead of assets. Here's something I learned a long time ago. The quickest way to stay poor is to look rich. And educated Americans, man, they're really good at this one. They get that first big paycheck and immediately upgrade their entire life. New car, bigger house, nicer clothes, better restaurants. They're earning more, so they're spending more. And at the end of the month, there's nothing left. I drive a car I bought years ago. I live in a house I purchased in 1958 for $31,500. It's worth millions now. Not because I renovated it every 5 years, but because I bought it and left it alone. I didn't buy a bigger house when I made more money. I didn't need one. And that decision, that simple decision to not inflate my lifestyle, is worth more than most people will earn in their entire lives. The difference between wealthy people and everyone else isn't how much we make, it's how much we keep. I see folks making $200,000 a year with zero savings because they're living a $200,000 lifestyle. Then I see folks making $70,000 with $1 million in the bank because they live like they make 40. Guess which one retires comfortably? Here's the real trap. Every time you get a raise, you immediately increase your fixed expenses, new car payment, bigger mortgage, private school tuition, country club membership. And suddenly that raise that was supposed to improve your financial security just locked you into a higher cost of living with no additional savings. You're making more, but you're not building wealth. You're just running on a more expensive hamster wheel. Let me tell you what asset allocation really means. It means deciding how much of your income goes toward assets that appreciate versus liabilities that depreciate. A car is a liability. It goes down in value the second you drive it off the lot. A house can be an asset if you buy it right and don't overlever, but most people buy the biggest house they can barely afford and wonder why they're house poor. That's not wealth building, that's just expensive. The maximum Social Security earnings subject to tax in 2026 just went up to $184,500. You know what that means? It means if you're making that much or more, you should be stuffing money into retirement accounts, buying assets, building real net worth. But most people at that income level are too busy looking successful to actually become successful. Brutal truth number 5, you have no emergency fund. So every crisis becomes a catastrophe. Let me tell you something that should terrify you. According to recent studies, about 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $1,000 emergency without going into debt. And it's not just people making minimum wage. It's educated professionals making good money who've structured their lives so tight that one bad month destroys them financially. I've always kept cash, always. Even when interest rates were low, even when people told me I was missing out on returns, because I understand something fundamental. Cash is optionality. Cash is freedom. Cash means when something breaks, when someone gets sick, when you lose your job, you don't have to make desperate decisions. You have time to think. You have time to find the right solution instead of the quick solution. Here's what happens when you don't have emergency savings. Your car breaks down. You put it on a credit card at 20% interest. Your kid needs braces. You take out a payment plan. Your company has layoffs. You can't make your mortgage payment. Every single financial setback becomes a debt event. And every debt event moves you further from wealth. It's a spiral. And educated people fall into it all the time because they thought their income was stable enough that they didn't need savings. Let me tell you what I consider an emergency fund. Minimum 6 months of expenses, not income. Expenses. If you spend $5,000 a month, you need $30,000 in cash, not invested in the stock market, not in your 401k, in cash, boring, safe, liquid cash that you can access tomorrow if you need it. And if that number seems impossible to you, that tells me your expenses are too high for your income. That's a lifestyle problem, not an income problem. The average Social Security benefit in 2026 is going up to $271 a month. That's after a 2.8% cost of living adjustment. Sounds nice until you realize that's barely enough to cover rent in most cities, let alone food, healthcare, and transportation. If that's your backup plan, you better have serious savings to supplement it, because Social Security was never designed to be a retirement plan. It was designed to be a safety net, and most educated Americans are planning to fall into that net without anything else underneath them. Emergency funds aren't sexy, they're not exciting, they don't give you great returns. But they're the difference between weathering a storm and drowning in debt. And if you're too educated to understand that, you're not as smart as you think you are. Brutal truth number 6. You're letting fear keep you out of the market. Now, here's where I see educated people really shoot themselves in the foot. They're scared of the stock market. They think it's gambling. They think it's risky. So they keep their money in savings accounts earning 1% while inflation runs at 3 or 4%. They're losing money every single day, and they think they're being conservative. Let me be crystal clear about something. Not investing is the riskiest thing you can do because guaranteed your money will be worth less tomorrow than it is today if you're not beating inflation. That's not a risk, that's a certainty. I've been buying stocks since I was 11 years old. I've lived through crashes, recessions, panics, bubbles, you name it. And you know what I've learned? The market goes up over time. Always has, always will. The S&P 500 has averaged about 10% annual returns over the long term. Not every year. Some years it's down 30%, some years it's up 40, but over decades it averages out to about 10%. If you're not participating in that, you're not being safe. You're being broke. And educated people, smart people, they read the headlines about crashes and corrections, and they convince themselves they're too smart to take that risk. Meanwhile, I'm getting richer while they're getting poor. Here's what really frustrates me. These same people will spend 4 years studying for a degree, 6 years climbing a corporate ladder, but they won't spend 4 hours learning about index funds. They won't read a book on investing. They won't talk to a financial advisor. They just assume the market is too complicated or too dangerous, so they avoid it entirely. That's not intelligence. That's intellectual laziness disguised as caution. Let me give you a number that should wake you up. If you invest $500 a month starting at age 30, earning 10% average returns, you'll have over $1 million by age 65. $1 million, but if you wait until you're 40 to start, you'll have less than $400,000. That 10-year delay cost you $600,000. That's the price of fear. That's the price of waiting until you feel ready or until the market seems safe. The IRA contribution limit for 2026 just went up to $7,500. If you're over 50, you can add another $1,100 in catch-up contributions. That's $8,600 you could be putting into a retirement account this year, tax advantage, growing compound interest. But most educated Americans aren't doing it because they're waiting. Waiting for what? A guarantee. There are no guarantees except this one. If you don't invest, you'll definitely be broke. Brutal truth number 7. You're ignoring the biggest wealth builder of all time. Compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. I didn't say that first. Einstein supposedly did, but it's true. And educated people, people who understand complex mathematics and can solve differential equations, somehow don't grasp the simple power of letting money grow over time. They think they'll catch up later. They won't. Let me tell you why compound interest is so powerful. It's not just about returns. It's about time. When you invest early, your money doesn't just earn returns. Your returns earn returns. And those returns earn returns. It snowballs. I started investing when I was 11 because I understood this principle before I understood anything else. I didn't have much money, but I had time, and time is the most valuable asset you'll ever have. Here's a brutal truth most people learn too late. The person who invests $5,000 a year from age 25 to 35, then stops, ends up with more money than the person who invests $5,000 a year from age 35 to 65. Same total investment, but the early investor had 30 extra years of compound growth on that first chunk. That's the difference between starting now and starting later. It's not linear, it's exponential. The problem with educated Americans is they're focused on maximizing income instead of maximizing time in the market. They think if they just get the next promotion, the next raise, the bigger salary, they'll start investing then. But then never comes, or when it does, they've lost 20 years of compound growth. You can't buy that back. You can never get those years back. I've watched friends who made way less than most professionals retire with millions because they started early and never stopped. I've watched doctors making $300,000 a year retire broke because they didn't start investing until they were 45. The math is simple. The discipline is hard, and most people fail at discipline because they think they're too smart to need it. Let me give you a wake-up call. If you're 30 years old and you have less than $50,000 invested, you're behind. If you're 40 and you have less than $200,000, you're way behind. If you're 50 and you have less than $500,000, you better have a serious plan because Social Security isn't going to cut it. And I don't care how educated you are. I don't care how impressive your resume is. If you don't have assets working for you, you're going to work until you die. Brutal truth number 8. Your retirement plan is a fantasy. Let's talk about retirement planning because this is where I see the biggest disconnect between what educated people think they need and what they actually need. Most folks have a number in their head, maybe $1 million, and they think that's the magic number. It's not even close. Here's the reality. The average Social Security check in 2026 is $2,071 a month. That's about $25,000 a year. If you think you're going to live comfortably on that, you're delusional. And if you think your 401k is going to fill the gap without a serious plan, you're even more delusional. The standard advice is you need about 70 to 80% of your pre-retirement income to maintain your lifestyle. If you're making $100,000 a year, that's 70 to 80,000 annually in retirement. Social Security covers about a third of that. Where's the rest coming from? Let me give you the math nobody wants to hear. If you want to safely withdraw 4% a year in retirement, which is the standard rule, and you need $50,000 beyond Social Security, you need $1.25 million saved, not $1 million, 1.25. And that's assuming you don't have major medical expenses, don't help your kids financially, and don't live past 85. Most people reading this right now don't have a tenth of that saved. Here's what kills me. People spend more time planning a 2-week vacation than planning their retirement. They assume it'll work out. They assume their company pension will be there even though private sector pensions are disappearing. They assume their house will fund their retirement even though most people can't afford to downsize in their same community. They assume they'll work longer if they need to, even though health issues or layoffs might take that choice away. The maximum 401k contribution for 2026 is $24,500. If you're between 60 and 63, you can do a super catch-up contribution of an extra $11,250. That's $35,150 you could be putting away this year. But the average American isn't even contributing $10,000. They're leaving free money on the table because they think they have time. They don't. Every year you delay serious retirement, saving costs you exponentially, not linearly, exponentially. And the brutal truth is most educated Americans are going to hit 65, look at their account balance, and realize they can't afford to stop working. That's not a retirement plan. That's a recipe for working until you physically can't anymore, and then living on whatever scraps are left. Brutal truth number 9. You're confusing income with wealth and estate planning. Here's something almost nobody talks about: estate planning, legacy protection, what happens to everything you built when you die. And educated Americans, despite all their smarts, are terrible at this. They think estate planning is for rich people. It's not. It's for anyone who wants their family to actually benefit from what they built instead of watching it get eaten up by taxes and legal fees. Let me tell you what happens when you die without a proper estate plan. Your assets go through probate. That's a legal process that can take months or years, cost thousands or tens of thousands in legal fees, and leave your family fighting over scraps. Your retirement accounts might get taxed at the highest possible rates. Your life insurance might end up in the wrong hands. Your house might have to be sold to pay estate taxes, and all because you were too busy or too cheap or too convinced it didn't matter to do the planning. Here's the truth about wealth. It's not just about how much you accumulate, it's about how efficiently you transfer it. I've structured my estate so that the vast majority goes to charity, but in a way that minimizes tax burden and maximizes impact. That didn't happen by accident. That happened because I spent time with lawyers and tax advisors creating a plan. Most people spend more time picking a car than planning their estate. The federal estate tax exemption for 2026 is over $13 million per person. Most people think that means they don't need estate planning. They're wrong, because estate planning isn't just about federal taxes. It's about state taxes, inheritance taxes, income taxes on retirement accounts, capital gains taxes, healthcare directives, power of attorney, trust, beneficiary designations, all of it. Here's what I see all the time. Smart people with good jobs and decent savings, no will, no trust, no clear beneficiaries on their accounts, no healthcare directive. They die and their families left scrambling, trying to figure out what they wanted while lawyers and the government take their cut. That's not wealth building. That's wealth destruction. If you don't have a will, get one. If you haven't reviewed your beneficiaries in 5 years, do it. If you have young kids and no guardian designated, fix that today. And if you have significant assets, talk to an estate planning attorney about trust, tax efficiency, and legacy protection, because the worst time to think about this stuff is when it's too late. Brutal truth number 10. You're waiting for perfect instead of starting now. Here's the final brutal truth, and it's the one that costs people the most. You're waiting for the right time, waiting for the market to correct, waiting for your student loans to be paid off, waiting for the promotion, waiting until you understand everything. And while you're waiting, you're getting poor. I started investing when I was 11 years old. I didn't know everything. I made mistakes, but I started, and that starting, that willingness to learn by doing, that's what made the difference. Most educated people are so afraid of making a mistake that they make the biggest mistake of all. They do nothing. They research forever. They wait for perfect information. They convince themselves they'll start next year. And next year becomes 5 years, becomes 10, becomes never. Let me tell you something I learned delivering newspapers in Omaha. Imperfect action beats perfect inaction every single time. You don't need to know everything to start saving. You don't need to be an expert to open a Roth IRA. You don't need a finance degree to understand index funds. You just need to start. Start with 10% of your income. Start with automating your savings. Start with maxing out your employer match. Just start. The biggest enemy of wealth building isn't the market. It's not taxes. It's not even your spending. It's your belief that you'll get to it later. Later is a lie you tell yourself to avoid doing something hard today. And every day you wait, every month you put it off, you're compounding failure instead of compounding wealth. Here's what I want you to do right now. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. Open your retirement account and increase your contribution by 1%. Just one. You won't even notice the difference in your paycheck, but over 30 years, that 1% will be worth tens of thousands of dollars. The next quarter, do it again and again until you're maxing it out. That's not complicated. That's not risky. That's just discipline. The average American reaches retirement with about $200,000 saved. That's not enough. That'll give you $8,000 a year using the 4% rule. Combined with Social Security, you're looking at $33,000 annually. You can't live on that. Not comfortably. Not in 2026 with inflation eating away at everything. You need more. And the only way to get more is to start now and never stop. Look, I've spent 94 years watching people make the same mistakes over and over. Educated people, smart people, good people, they confuse credentials with competence. They confuse paychecks with wealth. They think because they studied hard and got good jobs that financial success would just happen. It doesn't. It never does. Wealth is built through consistent, disciplined, intelligent decisions made over decades. It's built by living below your means, investing the difference, understanding taxes, and starting early. That's it. That's the whole game. You're not going to get rich quick. You're not going to beat the market with some secret strategy. You're going to get wealthy slowly, boringly, inevitably by doing what wealthy people have always done. You're going to pay yourself first. You're going to invest for the long term. You're going to control your lifestyle inflation, and you're going to start today. I started with almost nothing, 3 shares of stock and a paper route, but I understood the principles and I never stopped applying them. You don't need to be a genius. You need to be disciplined. You don't need perfect timing. You need consistent action. And you don't need $1 million to start. You need to start to eventually have $1 million. The 10 brutal truths I shared today aren't theories. They're the actual reasons educated Americans stay poor while others build wealth. You can ignore them if you want. You can tell yourself you're different. You can keep waiting for the perfect moment, or you can accept that the perfect moment was yesterday. The second best moment is right now, and get to work. Save this video. Come back to it when you need a reminder. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and then do the work. Because nobody's coming to save you. Not the government, not your employer, not some miracle investment. It's on you, and it always has been. Remember that number I asked you to calculate at the start, your net worth. That number needs to grow every single year until you retire, not your income, your net worth, assets minus liabilities. That's the only number that matters. And if it's not growing, you're not building wealth. You're just getting older with a nicer title and a better paycheck going to the same old expenses. I'll leave you with this. In 40 years, you're going to be 40 years older, whether you start building wealth today or not. The only question is whether you'll be 40 years older and wealthy or 40 years older and broke. That's your choice. Choose wisely.